So good morning, a real welcome on a bit of a drizzly and dull, Wednesday morning. But there we are. I'm sure learning about employment law will most certainly make you feel much more perky. Thanks to everybody that's attended. Really good to see clients and other people that have been previously join us. So thank you for that. And I am hoping that, as you should expect, this webinar will be interactive and I will be providing opportunities at the end to ask questions. So what are we going to look at today? So we're going to look at what is the Employment Rights Bill. So a little bit of a refresh on what the bill is, and most importantly, what are the 6 key areas of focus, which is based on the recent publication of the plans for the New Employment Rights Act. So we've got a few more people coming through. So welcome to those. Great. Okay. So everyone in? Yeah, great. So I'm going to also talk about what has been missed. So those of you that joined the previous webinar we ran will have seen that there was quite a shopping list of things that people were expecting. Some of those things have been pushed out. And finally, I'm going to talk to you about how you should start preparing for the changes, which essentially are a little bit further down the road, if you like, than we'd expected, but you do not need to start thinking about them now. So over to you. As always, I'm interested to hear what it is that worries you the most about the new legislation. So based on what you've heard in the press and the media, what is it that you are really worrying about? So if you could take to the chat and just be interested to hear, as I say, what your main worries are, and I can focus a little bit in on those as we go. Don't be shy, everybody. So what is it? What is it that's brought you today? Yeah, thanks, Vicky. Implications of hiring and probation periods. Absolutely. What else? What brings you here today? I'm joined also, just while you're doing that, by my 2 colleagues, Kirsty and Charlotte. So Kirsty, Charlotte, maybe drop in, what are you hearing from clients that are that they're saying they're most worried about?
I think the biggest one is the change to day one rights for a lot of employees. I think that's going to make a big difference, especially to small businesses.
Yeah.
Oh, someone else just said that. Great minds think alike.
Yeah, Kirsty's on mute. I think she was sharing something with us.
Sorry, I was just saying 0-hour contracts is probably the biggest thing at the moment, particularly for sort of hotels and things like that.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thank you, Kirsty. Yeah, perfect. Both things we're hearing a lot from our clients on. So, and thank you for all of your feedback. Yes, the 0 hours contract piece and the probation day one rights is most definitely up there. So I will be talking about those. Do please pop into the chat any questions that you might have, and I will, as I say, leave time at the end of this to talk through any particular points or questions. Okay, so then a little bit of a refresh. What is the Employment Rights Bill? And the Employment Rights Bill was a central tenet of Labour's manifesto through the election and was sunk into their plan to make work pay. And their pledge was that they would enact that within the first 100 days of being elected. What we've actually seen is that they've talked about that within the first 100 days of being elected, and where there was some expectation that everything would happen suddenly and everyone would have a meltdown because all the law changed overnight, that hasn't been the case. And in actual fact, the expected implementation is in 2026, which thankfully, I would say, means that the government has started to realise the honeymoon period's over, and just swapping out new legislation for old is not as simple maybe as it might appear in a manifesto. So the draft legislation was released on the 10th of October. What that gave us was a view of what's actually going to be focused on. And as I said, that is slightly watered down from what we had expected. So there was a small sigh of relief in that respect. But what it has done is it's provided more promises around the next phase of reforms, which is something I'll talk about down the presentation. There is no doubt, though, that the Employment Rights Bill still represents a huge shift in workers' rights, and that it is going to add quite significant costs and administrative burden to SMEs. And that's, if you like, what we're hearing a lot at the moment is the bite points, where the government's view is that it wants to drive entrepreneurialism, growth, and on the other side, we are faced with these new regulations which are going to be more onerous on employers. So there's a little bit of tension between those two things. We do expect that post-Christmas, the consultation process will start, and to be fair, the government has committed to being as consultative as it can be through that process. A shameless plug, but I myself was invited by the Deputy Prime Minister to visit Downing Street and talk to her and the ministers about the legislation, and I'm hoping that me and many other voices that they are listening to at the moment will help smooth the way for our clients and businesses in general. What's driving this? Well, the reality is, if you look at some of the underpinning views, that there are 2.8 million people currently economically inactive in the UK, and that has been post-COVID, people that are on long-term sick. And so one of the government's overall objectives, as you will know, is to get people back into work. As I said, for us, when we talk to our clients, there's cautious optimism about these changes, but there is concern about the impact it's going to have and the administrative burden that it's going to place on organisations. So then what are the key areas? So this is down from the 9 that I talked about in my first webinar. These are the 6 key areas that were focused on in the draft legislation on the 10th of October. And I'll talk about each one of these in turns, but it's going to be banning exploitative 0-hour contracts, SSP available from day 1, unfair dismissal rights available from day 1, which obviously we've already highlighted, flexible working, further parental and bereavement rights, and changes to pay, enforcement bodies and trade union rules. So let's move first then into exploitative 0-hour contracts, as they've been referred to. A fairly, I guess, problematic words that I, again, will tell you I shared at my meeting in Downing Street, that certainly we find amongst our client group that exploitation through 0-hour contracts is something that couldn't be further away from what they are aiming to do. And actually, as many of you know, the use of 0-hour contracts actually helps many businesses operate because of the industry that they're in or the services that they provide. Nonetheless, the government do, and actually certainly even the Conservative government, saw 0-hour contracts as fairly exploitative because it is seen as too weighted towards the employer, who can cancel shifts, and that, I think, is what the focus is here, is to provide a bit more permanence for people if they are in those arrangements. So what that looks like is that essentially you will need to provide guaranteed hours after a qualifying reference period. And what that means is that if, for example, you have employed an individual, a worker, on a 0-hour contract, and they've worked every Monday for the last 12 weeks, there will be then an expectation that you provide them with a permanent guarantee of those Mondays. So there's going to be a 12-week reference period used to determine whether that offer should be made. That is actually still implied in the 0-hour contracts, but not often used, dare I say, because people are not often aware of it. What this means for you, if you are using 0-hour contracts, is to start thinking about what might the replacement be if you don't want to get into permanently employing lots of people. We know with some of the work we're doing on this with our clients, often the 0-hour contracts, to be fair, are maybe wrongly used to employ people that are working permanent shifts. And so there's a bit of re-education, I think, here to help people understand that 0 hours is exactly what it suggests, which is often temporary cover to deal with sickness absence or to deal with peaks in in service requirement. But it is seen to nonetheless provide more safety and more predictability for employees. So it does slightly end the government's view that it is very one-sided. What we do know, though, is that, again, that may be problematic for organisations that are employing a lot of people on 0-hour contracts. It will bring a burden on more administrative sort of tracking processes. So start thinking about, if you are in that space, how you are using your 0-hour workers and what are the alternatives, which in summary will be part-time, full-time, or other arrangements, or true 0-hour arrangements. The next of the 6 that was fleshed out was SSP being available from day one. As you know, currently SSP is not payable for the first 3 days of an employee's sickness, and this is designed to, in the government's view, to help people stay off of work where they really need to because they are unwell without feeling a financial burden, albeit the lower earnings limit of the lower earnings limit also is going to be removed. So this is going to create a situation where many more people are not going to be financially worse off if they are off sick. And you may have situations that you've experienced, and certainly we do too, where sadly people have to come to work because the reality is they can't afford to miss those first 3 days. So this is a good thing, but what it will bring with it is some, I think, unintended consequences. For example, you may well see a spike in persistent short-term absence where people start to, sort of cotton on, if you like, that they won't be, that it won't be an unpaid situation. It will also mean, from a budgeting perspective, that you will need to build in the increase, whilst modest. If you've got a large number of people, then there will be a noticeable cost potentially if everybody starts to go onto short-term sick. So think about that in your budgeting process. Also, I think if we kind of think about how do we deal with this, what we're advising clients is to start making sure that their absence processes are robust, so that if people are going sick for genuine reasons, but that the notification processes are followed, the return to works are done, and any abnormally high absences are flagged. Because I think we find in reality that where people are maybe not genuinely sick, once employees tend to see that an organisation's facing into that short-term persistent absence can sometimes miraculously reduce. So same rules apply, really. Make sure that by applying focus on it and giving employees the support they need. So it might be that they're not taking enough holidays, for example, or it might be that they're dealing with undue stress and need an employee assistance program to talk to. But some of those things also will help cushion the blow here financially. Again, I will tell you that at the moment, in terms of sickness, it's believed that there's about 3 million people out on long-term sick. So it's, absence is a real issue for our clients at the moment. So something to, certainly to be ready for. But again, I would be suggesting that you work on that. You work on that now. So the unfair dismissal rights from day one, which was definitely the one I think that was the most headline grabbing. What you will be aware of is that typically up until this point and up until, sorry, the legislation is changed, that an employee has to have 2 years, what we refer to as continuous or qualifying service, to raise an unfair dismissal claim. Oftentimes in situations where people are underperforming or there's a issue, then employees can be dismissed sooner, providing the right rules are followed, and there's no sense of automatic unfair dismissal or wrongful dismissal or discriminatory practices. There's not a risk then of a tribunal claim. What this means, though, is that actually will fall away, and in real terms, we think that then there's going to be a 9-month probation period allowance, so that at least for the first 9 months, that day one rights won't apply. But don't take my word on that. We're still obviously waiting for that to be confirmed. Now, obviously, that is going to be a challenge. There's no two ways around that. But it once again points to, I think, the fact that if you are properly performance managing employees, dealing with issues as they arise, have the right processes in place, then the risk of a claim at any time should be greatly mitigated. Unfortunately, it's yet to be seen, but we are certainly seeing a rise in claims by employees. Hopefully this doesn't fuel that. But you will want to be thinking right now about, are our performance management processes robust? Does the probation period process, is it fit for purpose? Are we able to make sure that we're capturing underperformance early? And all of those things that essentially means that if you have to get to 9 months and you haven't dismissed someone, that all the right processes have been followed. So it's really important you get the recruitment piece right. It's really important that you continue to get the probation period process right, and that you have your stringent processes. It remains to be seen really how this will work in practice. I will tell you that the Employment Tribunal Service at the moment is about 1.5 years behind hearing claims that are raised. So if you raise a claim today, potentially you'll have to wait 1.5 years before that claim is heard. Quite how the Tribunal Service will deal with this change, again, remains to be seen. So it may not be as fortuitous for employees as it is positioned. I'm just going to have a quick look at chat. So just a quick plug: if you have questions, do please plug in any questions that you have, or any thoughts that you have. I just reflect a slightly more reflective point as I move on from here is, I guess, just to reiterate that the team and I are certainly seeing an increase in tribunal claims, and actually it's not at the moment, I think, based around probation. More so it's based around the mental health and well-being piece that is the challenge. So yeah, just a shout out, if you like, to that. Although we are dealing with a couple of cases that are based on probation dismissals, which in my experience has been quite uncommon. So unfortunately, I think we're going to be forever more in this space. So make sure your processes are fit for purpose. Okay, so flexible working. One of the big heralding points of the new legislation is that the government's view is essentially that the way that the employment relationships is structured is very draconian and doesn't actually reflect how life is today. And if you remember, even just pre-COVID, this concept of flexible working was really not particularly popular, and actually often sort of shied away from because of the view that you had to be in the office from 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. So it was all very it was all very rigid and fairly clean cut. And as we know, COVID threw a landmine in the middle of all of that, and we are where we are. So at the moment, employees have the right to make 2 flexible working requests a year. That was increased last year, and you as the employer have to explain if you are refusing that, why that refusal is in place. What this will do is it essentially, I think, switches the onus on it being employee-led, so the employee has to ask for it at the moment, to it being a basic right of the employee from day one. So they will be able to make the requests, and they will still be able to expect a response from you around whether or not you can meet it. And there is a particular set of criteria that is used for that. Once again, I suppose even with the change in the legislation this year, we're not seeing a particularly significant rise in flexible working, but we're certainly observing employers using flexible working more in the norms of how they operate. And in this space, our recommendation is that you think about whether the traditional models you might be using of full-time, for example, and some part-time can be adapted to allow for more flexible working in the team. One of the real upsides with flexible working is that you can attract talent that you might not ordinarily have been able to if you are insisting on a full-time role, for example, or a 9 to 5 role or some such. And we see so many great variations of that working well. So if you want to talk about some of that, do by all means contact me. I guess again, as I sort of considered this, I would be thinking about asking questions at interview stage. So, you know, what is it that one of the very usual questions is, what are you looking for in a role with us? People might then share with you that they need flexible working. To the best of my knowledge, it's not prohibitive to ask the flexible working question, but it can be a challenge if then you indirectly discriminate against someone that is unable to work full-time because they've got child, carer sort of responsibilities and things. So you have to be careful in this space, but we will help you navigate through that. We have a question from Vicky. Is the criteria? Yes, Vicky, absolutely. The criteria is, I think there are, from memory, 5 or 6 criteria. And it is, as it says in the box there, the criteria will be additional cost, detrimental impact, inability to reorganize the work, difficulty to recruit extra staff. So the criteria is fairly comprehensive. Do note, though, that with flexible working, employees can appeal the decision also if it's refused. Okay, on then to further parental and bereavement rights. This really continues the theme of bringing the legislation up to date, recognizing that there are key points in the employee's life cycle that we should be supporting, and one of those is around parental and bereavement leave. So once again, all parental and paternity leave is going to be made available from day one, whereas at the moment that's typically made available after 26 weeks service. And also all employees will be able to access bereavement leave. And what the proposal for that bereavement leave is that it will be 1 week of pay and leave for bereavement, which is exclusive of child bereavement, which at the moment is already enshrined in legislation. So if there is a bereavement for an under 18-year-old or a stillborn, then people are now entitled to take bereavement leave of up to 2 weeks. So you'll certainly want to review and update your policies. What's interesting with this, and over many years, I'm sure, like you, I've had conversations around, is granny a dependent? Is the dog? Is the cat? Is the uncle, that lives in sort of Siberia? All of those things, seemingly they're going to try and clarify, which, good luck with that, because I've heard some fairly great stories about, cousins twice removed, and I need to go to the funeral for 8 weeks in Marbella. So yeah, so hopefully some of that clarification will be coming through. Right now, what you can be doing is you can be looking at your policies, and I will say, there's been a lot of hype about, to be fair to the government, about lots of changes, but many of the companies we work with will already be very compassionate and will already be providing bereavement leave or additional family or paternity leave. So if you're in that space, that's brilliant. What these changes are aimed to do is to increase, if you like, the protection at a statutory minimum level, but not everyone operates in that place. And often in spaces like this, even acting with discretion and increasing it is a good thing. So, yeah. Okay, so what else is on the agenda? So the government is continuing to propose that the trade union laws are going to be changed and actually reinforced, not unexpectedly, given as a Labour government, there is usually a very strong relationship with the trade unions. We haven't seen any more about that. There's also a view that there's going to be a new enforcement body, which will be called the Fair Work Agency, that will look at how the minimum wage is set. Unfortunately, I can't really share much more than that because we don't have that information. As I explained at the top, the government has chosen, if you like, to pull back on some of the immediate priorities and push out some of the others. So we're still waiting to see how that's going to work in practice. But as always, we will keep you posted. The other interesting thing that was suggested to be in the first 100 days were things like worker status. And many of you that we work with, this conversation, we often have this conversation about, is an employee an employee? Is an employee a worker? There is a mismatch between tax law and employment law on this, and it's a very sticky area to be in. So we were quite pleased to hear the government were wanting to address that, and unfortunately then we were quite sad to hear they decided they're probably not going to yet. So all of those challenges amongst everything else remain. The right to switch off, which was a nod, if you like, to our European colleagues, whereby essentially this is a more heightened right to not be called at 10 and 12 o'clock at night or at weekends, and is really based in this whole idea that people just need the ability to not work 24/7, and for their mental health. That again has been pushed back. The parental leave review, that in itself is also being pushed back, and the expansion of the equality bill, which I understand is going to be still part of the consultation process, but is going to be a bit of a longer consultation than was expected. So what does that all mean? I guess is probably one of your main questions now, is how do we navigate that landscape? And it's really, despite the fact that the legislation may not be going live, as it were, until 2026, you should be thinking now about how you mitigate the issues and how you start to prepare. So our feedback is to act now. So it's clear now, based on the 6 areas that I've talked about, where the changes are coming. A year is not really a long time in business. I'm aghast that we're already in November. I remember only just doing an employment law update in March. So what you should be thinking about now is, how do we get ahead of the changes, because we know what's coming, and there's no doubt, if you like, that what none of us can do is put our head in the sand. This is going to affect us all as employers, so you need to be thinking about those now. The next thing to be thinking about is, are our contracts and policies and everything up to date? I certainly don't recommend that you change the policies now to meet the new legislation. The guidance hasn't been issued, it's not been enacted, but you might want to think about offering slightly more. For example, you might want to look at a company sick pay plan, or or I don't know, an enhanced bereavement policy. Those things are possible now. Either way, we would recommend that you use this as a timely opportunity to review your HR policies and procedures. With recruitment, I mean, this in itself is, as I'm sure you're all experiencing, is a whole nightmare in one go. People are finding talent acquisition impossible. I could go on, but essentially in this space, be thinking about how might we start to get into different markets to find people that maybe can do what will be seen as new 0-hour contracts. Can we use part-time rather than full-time? How are we interviewing to make sure that we're successful so that we're not having to dismiss and re-recruit? How are we making sure we onboard people so that they stay with us and we're not having to dismiss during probation? All of those things need a bit of a review. A big thing for me here is training to make sure that your managers actually know and understand the changes, because this will be changing the employment relationship, and it's the managers on the front line that need to make sure understand those and can incorporate them into the way that they're managing people. So training and briefing your people is key, and finally making sure that you've got a budget in place so that you can absorb what the costs are likely to be in the as a result of the changes. It's a little bit for us, I guess, just to share a bit of a different perspective of moving from compliance, which is where essentially this legislation puts you as employers, and moving through to get into a place where you're operationally in a good place, ultimately moving then towards being more strategic in your view of how you run HR. So this is all very compliance based, this legislative change, but you will definitely need to be moving into operational to make sure that you've got the right policies and procedures in place. And then beyond that, to think more strategically, there are key areas here that are going to be quite significantly changed, such as how do we employ people, who do we employ, how do we deal with gaps, sickness and all of those things. And that's the space you want to be thinking about when you're thinking about your strategic direction of HR. I've suggested, and I won't labour on this, but I've suggested the way to do that is to make sure you've gone through your audit, looked at your onboarding and recruitment procedures, and finally you've looked at management training, and I'll talk about that at the end. But I'm rushing through that because I want to now get into the questions and answers. I'm happy to take those verbally, or if you want to use the chat function, please do so. No questions are bad questions. Everyone's as confused as I am about everything, so we're all in the same place. So yeah, ask away. Just while you're warming up to that, I might just ask Charlotte, which is naughty of me because I'm putting her on the spot. Charlotte, what question do you tend to get asked about the new legislation?
I think, and it's kind of a question we don't have a solid answer to, is when is it coming in? I think the government really pushed hard with, we're going to do all these great things, and then they've been a little bit vague with the actual follow through. So, one of the questions I get asked a lot at the moment is about the 2-year thing. We don't know when that's going to kill, when that's going to come to day one. We did some work recently where it was speculated that it might already be ticking away, so that potentially in 2026 there'll be a kind of cut-off point, and it's not going to be a hard and fast, okay, but if you were employed yesterday, you've got 2 years before you can make a claim, but if you're employed today, you can make one straight away. It may be that we're already ticking down that 2-year period. So I think it's really essential that if you've got somebody who you are maybe in two minds about, maybe you feel like isn't a good fit, now is the time to start thinking about, can that be improved, or do we need to think about using that ability to dismiss them earlier on? Or you've got a question.
Yeah, good, really good shout. Yeah, I totally agree. So great question here from Tracy. Good morning, Tracy. Nice to hear from you and hope you're well. What's the biggest risk for companies with the new legislation? Are there any own goals that you see companies making with the new legislation? Yeah, it's good, really good. I think You know, the biggest risk in practical terms is companies ignoring the legislation or not being aware of it and suddenly finding that dismissing someone in 12 months leads to a tribunal claim, for example. So almost, dare I say, ignorance is one of the biggest risks. Definitely after that, this whole unfair dismissal change is going to be a big risk, and not managing through the probation. And also this thinking around, oh, I'll extend the probation so that I've got more time, may not fly if 9 months is the maximum. So there's going to need to be quite a lot of change around that, and thinking around making sure that if people aren't performing, that we are on that much sooner than maybe we might typically be. And then the other risk is the not comply. The other biggest risk is not complying with things like the fall away of the 3-day waiting period for SSP, the removal of the minimum earnings barrier, anything financially focused will also be a risk. So. And then ultimately, dare I say, I think the risk we all spend all our time in tribunal because everyone's making claims, which is a pessimistic and highly, highly dramatic thing to say, but we are seeing a rise in claims. So the risk of not getting this right, of not having the paperwork ready and all of those things means that down the road, you could well pay a high price. It's a great question, Tracy. Thank you.
I think as well, it's going to make a big change because I think employees are going to know their rights a bit more. I think whereas now people are a bit unsure about what's the 3 days, what if there's a weekend. I think if it's from day one, employees are going to know that. So if we're not on top of it, they're going to be banging on the door and saying, you've done this wrong, I'm taking you to tribunal almost, which is very dramatic. But, people don't like it when you mess with their money. So they know it's owed to them. We just need to be on top of that.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, absolutely agree. Thanks. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay,
I was going to say as well, sorry, just to jump in on the
Please
flexible
do.
working thing, just because I think that the government really pushed that as quite a biggie of, I've had a couple of clients say to me, oh God, everyone's going to ask for 4-day weeks. And I think the biggest thing is everyone could have already asked for a 4-day week. They've already had that ability. I think what the government have done in a very sneaky way is just remind employees they have that right. So the reality is, yes, it is from day one, and that's not ideal because actually, if you employ somebody to work 5 days a week and they turn around and say, I want to work 4, it makes it a big change. But actually, we still have the ability to say no. I think there's actually 8 reasons we can say no, and that has already been in place. So we do have that ability, but it's always best just to kind of follow the process, because if you can't accommodate it, there's always a good reason for that.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good. Thank you. Yeah, totally agree. Nalaxi, I understand businesses. Good morning, Nalaxi. I understand businesses will have challenges with the new legislation, but what can HR do to make sure that we're not just compliant and make sure we're going above and have best practices? A lovely question, Nalaxi. That is the point, I think, that, ultimately, irrespective of what we think, the law is the law. We should be compliant. We shouldn't be talking about it as extra burdensome because we should be broadly in in that space. Around going above and beyond, I think, again, maybe slightly basic, but it will be making sure the policies are in place and that they're being followed, maybe considering whether as an organization you can offer enhanced schemes, so enhanced sick pay schemes, enhanced bereavement or family friendly policies. Best practice is often the stuff we miss most often. So as Charlotte said, communicating with employees so that they know that we are not trying to hide behind the legislation. We're actively trying to support them and make sure they get their statutory rights. Regular reviewing how you're operating, maybe looking at the market to see what other people are doing, and involving employees would be would all be a good thing. So good question, thank you. Vicky, what are the delayed planned expansions in the Equality Act? Now that, Vicky, is a great question.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please do.
Feel like the school SWAT. I know this one. So we've already seen some. So as of the end of October, sexual harassment was added, specifically that the employer has a responsibility to actively prevent it. It's not just have a policy if it does occur. The other bits we're going to look at are quite female focused. So they're looking at mothers potentially coming back to work who are breastfeeding, protection for mothers who have been away and are coming back to work. So we're thinking about extra protection from redundancy, dismissal, that sort of stuff. But it's been delayed because we haven't got the specifics on it yet. They did talk about also expanding what we qualify as a disability, but again, super vague on what the actual details of that are at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. And also, if memory serves, there's talk about introducing an ethnic pay, a mandatory ethnic pay, pay gap reporting process. So
As
that's
well as expanding the gender pay gap one. There'll be you'll have to report and show what you're doing rather than just currently bigger organizations just have to say this is what we got. They'll have to say this is what we got and this is what we're going to do about it. Which is, you know, maybe not so bad for smaller businesses, but it will for the bigger ones that might trickle down.
And Charlotte raises a really good point. Again, if I may just give a quick kind of follow up to that, the sexual harassment legislation, which we've been sort of advertising about recently, you guys really need to look at that, because what it does is it places an onus on employers to proactively show that they are doing everything to, to stamp out sexual harassment. So it's no longer allowable just to say, I have a policy, or I've mentioned it in induction. There has to be very clear steps that you're taking to make sure that there's no sexual harassment in the workplace. So it has a bit of a bite to it, and rightly so. But yeah, unfortunately, I would say something else for you to add to your list. So we are here to help. Hopefully, those that have attended our previous webinars see that we, all of the things that we've talked about, we are well ready to assist on. And actually, Charlotte, Kirsty, the team, and I regularly do so every day, every week. So do talk to me if you are having your head in your hands and thinking, I need HR support. We offer everything from one-off projects right the way through to our monthly retained service, which some of our clients are online for. And as you can see, this is something that we like to do to make sure that our clients stay informed. I love a webinar, as you know, so we are about to roll out our next series of HR how-tos, which has gone down extremely well this year. These are free. These are half an hour punchy sessions, how to deal with this, and then at least half of the time the floor opens for people then to ask questions. So do come along if you've got any sort of issues. As I said last time, they were really well attended, and they are on our HR Department Clapham website also, so you can find that, and I'll send you the link for those after. And then finally, killing you with kindness, I guess, there's even more free stuff that we can provide to you. So we have our own employment rights hub, employment rights bill hub, where there are all sorts of resources to help you. And then we also have a free and really snazzy HR audit tool, which you can ask some questions, and it sends you a colourful report that shows you where you might want to focus your efforts on compliance. So all those things are free and available to you now, and I will refer to them in the follow-up email that we send to you. Last thing is, I'd really appreciate your views, and we will send you this link as well by email on how you found the webinar. We're really keen to develop the webinar series because they always go down so well. So if you have a camera phone, have a quick click of the of that black boxy thing. Its names I've completely forgotten.
It's a QR code.
It's a QR code. Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. Showing my age there. Apologies. I just think it's a black boxy thing. Have a click on that and give me your feedback. Genuinely, it's all really welcomed, and we can start to tailor some of the content then more to what you're looking for. And finally, stay connected. So thank you again for to all of those that attended, that have been previous attendees. We're all over social media, and here is our links. As I said, Charlotte and I are doing the how-tos, so we'd love to see you in the coming months on those. If you've got any questions, let me know. Even if it's just to have a quick coffee and talk about a problem you've got or a gap in your processes. As you probably picked up by now, I'm always happy to chat. So, do certainly contact me. Beyond that, thank you very much. I'm pleased to say we finished slightly earlier than we'd hoped, but unless you've got any questions, then that ends the webinar, and thank you for your attendance.